Okay, so today we're going to talk about workforce safety and wellness. This is chapter 2 in your textbook. And what we're going to try and do here is understand the impacts that physical issues, mental issues, and emotional issues can have on you once you're out in the field. Discuss stress, define stress, and talk about how it can affect you. And discuss how you can reduce stress, because you will inevitably encounter stress. It's not a realistic goal to say that you're not, and so the realistic goal is to figure out how we're going to deal with the stress that you are inevitably going to encounter. Some of the stress is going to be brought up by the fact that you're going to be facing people who are sick, who are injured, and who may be dying and who may die in front of you, and then you have to deal with their family and help their family sort of work through that situation. And then we're going to talk about critical incident stress, what it is, how you can recognize it, and how you can deal with it and mitigate it, and then talk about ways you can have a healthy lifestyle that hopefully will reduce the impact of all of these things on you. So there are three components of wellness that we're going to talk about. There's physical, mental, and emotional, and you can also see this as sort of mind, body, and spirit. And if any one of these things is out of balance, you're going to have a hard time dealing with the natural stress that comes from the job that you're about to start doing. So, when we talk about physical well-being, we're talking both about eating well and being physically fit. There's a number of benefits of both of these things. So to talk about nutrition, you need to get the right nutrients into your body. And when you're on a shift, when you're working, this is kind of hard to do. You're oftentimes eating on the run. You don't know when you're going to get downtime to eat your next meal. Meals are interrupted by calls. So it's important that you work hard to sort of bring food to work, or do whatever it takes to get good meals. You, when you're on the road, when you're running calls, if you have a minute between calls and you're eating at gas stations primarily, that's not the best food for you. You're not going to find good there. You're not going to get a balanced diet. You're not going to get good nutrition. So maybe you throw some better food for you in a lunchbox that you have with you, and you can grab an apple or something of the sort instead of grabbing a chimichanga from the Allsups. You want to make sure that you're keeping your weight under control. Again, sort of eating from the Allsups is not a good way to do that. And then just sort of how do you improve behavior as far as eating? Well, the biggest thing is planning ahead. You know that when you go to work or when you're on a call, you may not be able to eat. So eat when you can, and eat hopefully better food than the stuff from the gas station. And then physical fitness. Well, physical fitness is going to lead to mental well-being. You're going to feel better if you're physically fit. You will have more cardiovascular endurance, so if you ever have to go hiking out on a call, which is something that happens somewhat regularly, that won't be such a big deal for you. Muscle strength is obviously important when you're lifting people and moving them around and gurneys and carrying equipment and things like that, as well as flexibility. All of those things are components of physical fitness that, and combined with nutrition, are going to lead to better physical well-being. So there's stress, inarguably stress in what we're going to do. There's stress in life. And there's also, people don't recognize, there is something that is good stress. There's, without the stress to, get up and go to work and to study and to improve yourself and to make more money, we wouldn't be motivated. And that good stress is called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. And that's a good thing. But there's also just regular old stress, which is not necessarily a good thing. And there are some calls that are going to be more stressful than others. When we're dealing with elderly patients, for example, or children, when we're dealing with either end of the spectrum, those tend to be more stressful calls than other calls, just because we sort of view those demographics, those groups, as being more valued in a certain way than the general. We view them as vulnerable, and so when they're vulnerable, we put more value on protecting them, and when they don't get the protection that we think they deserve and they end up getting hurt or injured or sick, those are stressful calls for us, especially for people who may have, elderly family members that they care about, or children. EMTs, EMRs with children dealing with pediatric calls is a stress trigger for them. So our goal is to recognize that we have this stress and figure out how to deal with it in a healthy, productive way. And we need to recognize the signs of the buildup of stress that is becoming too much. And some of the signs of stress, these are some of the signs of a stress reaction that you can see when you're worrying too much, when the stress can push you to do your best. The stress can, you can be stressed because you go on a call and say, boy, I can't really do much for this patient because of my level of training or because I don't know something. And so the stress can drive you to improve your knowledge and improve your skills, and maybe you improve your training and move up to the next level of provider. And also, it's normal sort of to talk about stress with your coworkers. And this is, in some places, a sort of forbidden topic. People don't like to talk about it, and it has a stigma attached to it, like you shouldn't be a wimp or something of that sort. But that's a bad stigma. It's not good that we have that as a profession, that reaction. So you should feel comfortable talking about stress with your coworkers, talking about stress with your crew members, and figuring out if they have any coping strategies you can use as well. But sometimes stress gets beyond just those sort of normal responses, and you'll get into things where you see you get anxious when a call goes out, or you're concerned about going on calls, or you don't want to go to work, or you don't want to respond to calls because you're worried about what might happen. That's the point where you should start getting concerned about the amount of stress that you're under and how you are coping with it. Personality changes. If you find yourself snapping at your significant other or your children or your parents or your family members or whoever the case may be, you're normally a very happy-go-lucky, joking kind of person, and you find yourself being an irritable person. If you're treating people differently, if you don't sleep as well, if you just find yourself getting super depressed about work and about what you're doing, in general, those are some concerning stress responses that you need to be aware of. And then if it gets to the point of apathy, where you just don't care anymore, that's also a pretty big red flag, where you're going on a serious call and your response is not, I'm going to do the best I can here, but your response is, I don't really care about this. That's what we refer to as burnt out, and that's when you need to start thinking about taking a break or talking to somebody about the level of stress that you're dealing with. When we are out on calls, we may very well be dealing with people who are dealing with death and people who are dying. And sometimes they may be very far away from dying, but they've heard that they just got word that they have a terminal disease, that they have cancer or something of the sort. And a lady named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross studied and came up with these 5 stages of grief. And while they are listed sequentially, they're listed in order, people don't necessarily go through them in this order, and they may jump from one stage to the other. So it's important that you remember that, yes, they're listed in a certain order, but they don't always go through this order, and in this order. So when we're looking at them, we look at denial. This is, somebody is told they have terminal cancer, and their initial reaction is, no way, that can't be possible. That's denial. This can't be happening to me. I'm a young, healthy man. I can't have cancer. Cancer happens to older people. And then the next stage, people will get angry. Why did this happen to me? What did I do? I've been a good person my entire life. I've, done everything, quote, right, and I shouldn't be the one having cancer and dying from a disease. I never smoked, I never, whatever. And then you get to bargaining. And people will try to bargain with some higher power or the disease or the injury or whatever to say, okay, well, I will do this if you change the outcome. Not logical. It's not going to make a difference, but people will still do it. Well, if I do this, then I won't have the disease anymore. Then people will slip into depression, perhaps, where they're just depressed. They're constantly sad. They don't have much energy. They don't really feel like perhaps going to get their treatments anymore. They don't want to fight with the disease anymore. And then if that all happens and people are still have the disease, they may get to an acceptance phase where they have made peace with the fact that, yep, this disease is going to kill them or this injury is going to kill them, and they're okay with that because they've made their peace with it and they've gone through the entire process. Again, though, I talked about these as one stage to another. They don't necessarily work that way, and people can jump from one stage to another. I also talked about them dealing with people who actually have the disease or dying, but family members can go through this as well. If they've been told that their husband or their wife or grandmother or grandfather or whatever, father, mother, has a terminal illness, they can be going through the stages of grief as well. And you might find a situation where you're actually dealing more with the family member of a deceased person than you are with the dead person, because once they're dead, there's not really much we can do for them. And instead, we're going to be dealing primarily with their families. So, how can we address the stress? We talked about eating well. We talked about, healthy and well-balanced meals. We talked about, yes, that's difficult on duty. And we should try to avoid eating fast food. I fully recognize that, yes, sometimes it's necessary. It's all you can get when you come back from a call at 10 o'clock at night or whatever. Taco Bell or McDonald's or KFC might be the only thing open. It's okay on occasion. It's not good if that's the sort of norm. We should drink a lot. And no, I don't mean stuff at the bar. I mean water or juice, perhaps. We're not looking for, if somebody is drinking a ton of booze to deal with the stress of their job, that's unhealthy as opposed to healthy. Now, an occasional drink now and then, not a big deal. But if you find yourself or a coworker or a family member having multiple drinks after every call, every night, or whatever to deal with the stress, that's a warning sign. Also, caffeine, ton of coffee or a ton of soda, sure, you need your caffeine to get through the day, that's fine. But if you find yourself almost primarily drinking coffee or soda or energy drinks or something of the sort, those aren't the most healthy things for you long term. I would try and focus more on water or juice or things that are less processed and sugary. And then, here we are following the line of eat, drink, and be merry. And yeah, you should try to enjoy life, even though you are in a profession that some might see as depressing. You still, when you get home, play with your wife or your husband or whatever, play with your kids if you have them, do whatever it is you do to have fun, whether that be hunting or horseback riding or basket weaving or whatever. Take some time once you get home to put work away for a while and have fun with what you, quote, normally do to release. We can We know we're going to confront stressors. That's unavoidable. So what we can try to do is change our response and our attitude about them. Instead of saying, wow, that was a horrible call and I saw really nasty things, you could perhaps say, wow, that was a call where I learned a lot. And because I saw this, I learned that. Um, Sort of try and flip the switch on what your response to those calls are. Don't, if something goes wrong on a call, you should try and figure out what went wrong and how you can ensure it doesn't go wrong again. But obsessing about it doesn't change it, and it doesn't do anything. Instead, you've done the healthy thing and said, well, this device failed. What can we do to try and prevent it from failing next time? And then don't be afraid to seek professional help. And if you know somebody who is seeking professional help, don't make fun of them for it, because they're doing what they need to do to mitigate and to deal with their stress. Change your work hours if you can, or sometimes people have long-term partnerships on a truck that work great. Other times it becomes obvious that it's time for a new partner. So keep those things in mind, where maybe you need to change your schedule so you're working less nights so you can be home during the day, or whatever the case may be, or you can be home at night with your family. Figure out if altering your work hours will be helpful. And if you can, you want to minimize your physical responses to the stress, and part of the way you can do that is to sort of reframe the whole thing. Reframe, like I was talking about, from wow, that was a horrible call to wow, that was a call I learned a lot on. And then over time, we as a profession are notorious for working huge amounts of hours, and even in a way sort of taking pride in how many hours that you've worked. Oh wow, look at me, I've worked 4 days straight. That's not very good. You should be going home, you should be taking a break. By the time you've worked more than a couple of days in a row, especially if you're not getting much sleep, you are probably not much good to your patient, and you're probably doing yourself harm, physically perhaps, and certainly emotionally and mentally, by being there for that long. So go home, take a break. Critical stress. So this is something that goes beyond sort of the normal levels of stress. Now, oftentimes you'll see people talk about you should do a critical incident stress debriefing on a serious call. And that's sort of true, but it can also be, so the trigger for a CISD, a critical incident stress debriefing team coming, doesn't necessarily have to be a big, gnarly, nasty call. It could be a relatively minor call that results in a reaction because it's the culmination of a lot of things. Perhaps you've been working a lot of hours, you haven't gotten much time off, you've been stressed about you've been stressed about things at home. So it doesn't always have to be that, pediatric code that you couldn't save, or the multi casualty incident where you had 10 patients on the side of the road and everything was big and bloody and nasty. It could just be the result of an accumulation of a bunch of different things. So how do you contact the CISD team? Well, you can contact them through Santa Fe Control, which is a statewide resource. Ideally, the debriefing should be within 24 to 72 hours of the incident. And, that's ideally. It doesn't always work, especially if you're in a more remote area and somebody has to get out to you. But the other thing you should remember is it's not only a supervisor or a senior person who can activate and call for a CISD thing to happen. It can be anybody who is involved in the incident. So, when we're talking about physical well-being, we know that we don't always get the sleep we would like. We are woken up to go on calls. We might not get back to sleep for a while. So our sleep is intermittent, it's irregular, it's broken up. We don't get into the deep REM sleep necessarily. Circadian rhythms get messed up. So that's not going to that's not conducive to good restful sleep, especially if you have multiple nights in a row like that. There are some studies that look at sleep deprivation and show that if somebody goes without sleep for 48 hours, a normally mentally healthy, well-adjusted person after 48 hours starts exhibiting some of the behaviors of a paranoid schizophrenic. So it's only a little bit of time without good sleep that you start seeing major effects. So what can we do? Well, we can't control when calls come in, so we can try and work on our quality, improving the quality of our sleep. We can do that through exercising. We can do that through ensuring that we're tired when we get in bed, physically tired, so we actually go to sleep quicker. Avoiding caffeine, avoiding alcohol, medicating yourself to sleep. Self-medicating alcohol is not really good restful sleep. And then maybe you can't sleep as well as you'd like, but just find a few minutes to relax. Maybe you walk away from the TV, you walk away with a book, or you just go and sit and look at the mountains or look at the clouds or chill and just try and relax your mind and maybe even your body to improve your physical well-being at that point. So, we want to prevent disease, and we can prevent disease and injury with good physical fitness. If you have a good, strong back and you follow good body mechanics, you're much less likely to get a back injury, which is a pretty common injury in EMS. We're going to be in potentially hostile environments where people don't want us there. People sometimes view us as an extension of law enforcement, and they may not like law enforcement very much for whatever reason. Rescue situations, if you're cutting apart a car, if you're hauling somebody out of a ravine, if you are hiking somebody, carrying them out of a mountain, all of those things, it will really, really help if you are physically fit. And then driving safely. We don't want to get injured. One of the most dangerous things we do every day when we're responding to a call is simply turning our lights on. Just pushing that master on switch and all of your lights go on and you start driving around with your siren and your lights on. That's actually pretty dangerous because people on the street don't really know what to do when they see that. And then use our equipment that's been provided to us to prevent injury. Everything from a retroreflective vest that you put on when you're at the side of the road being one of the more dangerous places for first responders and EMS providers, because people, as they're driving by the accident scene or whatever you're dealing with on the side of the road, their eyes tend to get drawn to you, the flashy lights and everything, and then their cars tend to follow where their eyes are. So you want to make yourself as visible as possible. At the other end, it's just as simple as putting on gloves, goggles, gowns, mask. All of those things should be used when appropriate so you don't get ill, you don't get exposed, you don't get hit by a car, and you are physically healthy enough to continue working. And then there are also illnesses and diseases like cardiovascular diseases, like cancer, like infectious diseases, that we want to limit the chance of us getting them. We can't eliminate the risk of those things entirely, but we know certain behaviors are more likely to lead to those type of diseases, so we should avoid those behaviors, tobacco products and bad food and things like that. And, we're going to be exposed to people with infectious diseases, so we should use the stuff that we've been provided to limit our exposure. When we're caring for injured patients, oftentimes we forget some of the very simple things. We forget to introduce ourselves. Patients are in a bad situation when we show up, and we just show up and start doing stuff. We don't necessarily say who we are. We don't necessarily say what we're doing there. We don't sort of treat them as people sometimes. So just walk up to them and say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm with the ambulance, I'm with the fire department, and I'm here to help you. How can I help you today? And just that little 5-second introduction is going to make a huge difference in their sort of perception of what you're doing, in their confidence in you, in their family's confidence in you, and you start immediately developing a rapport with the patient. And it's important that you develop a rapport with the patient, because if you don't have a good rapport with your patient, they're not really going to want to answer your questions. So it also has a direct patient care impact, because if the patient thinks you're mean, why are they going to answer the questions, the very personal questions that you're going to be asking them? And then you want to find out what their immediate needs are, and typically these are pretty obvious. And when you talk about patient assessment, you're going to be talking about finding and fixing life threats. And avoid telling them everything's going to be okay, because you don't really know that. You may think it, and you may say something along the lines of, well, it looks like everything's going well, but you don't want to say, don't worry guys, everything's okay, because sometimes you're wrong and everything's not okay, and now you've given them false hope, and that's sort of mean to do, and it's not conducive to them seeing you professional. So you are going to see people who are near death or who have died, and people have different responses to this, and that's totally acceptable. There are different cultures that are going to have different responses. There are people who have different experiences with death or with illness or with dying that are going to lead to different responses to a family member, to somebody dying. Your composure and your professionalism is going to help direct how the family deals with this. If you are bent out of shape and you are sad, it's understandable, but you can't exhibit that, because when somebody's family member is dying, it's not about you, it's about them, and you are there to help and to serve them, not to sort of serve your own personal agenda about death and dying. So you've got to manage your own feelings, and I would encourage you to start thinking about this before you ever even go on a call. Is, what do you think about death? How are you going to respond when you're presented with somebody dying right in front of you that you can't do anything to help and prevent them from dying necessarily? Now, you may not know. There's no way to know for sure how you're going to respond until you're actually presented with it. But you should start thinking about it, and you should recognize before you get there that eventually, yes, you're going to have to look at a wife or a husband or a son or a daughter or a parent in the face, in the eyes, and tell them, I'm sorry, but your son or your daughter or your husband or your wife has died, and there's nothing more we can do about it, and I'm very sorry about that. So it's a good thing to try and think about that and prepare yourself for it ahead of time. It's also important that you don't use euphemisms for death. Don't say they've gone to a better place. Don't say they've gone to heaven. You don't know what their individual's belief systems are. Don't say that they've passed on. In a moment of crisis when a family member is dying, those phrases don't necessarily mean anything. And you would be amazed at how strong people's denial can be until they actually hear the words, they have died. That makes it final. And you not saying that sort of gives them a false hope that there's still a chance. So, signs of death. Well, a sign of death is obviously there's no more biological function. The organism has ceased to exist as a live organism. You should, depending on your local protocols, begin care if you suspect that somebody is dead, but there's not obvious signs of death. And obvious signs of death are things like decapitation or liver mortis or pooling, where all of the blood in the body has pooled to whatever side was lowest, to the front or the back or the bottom or whatever. If there is a DNR order, do not resuscitate order, but you're not sure if it's valid or not, you should provide care. You would rather be defending providing care to somebody who may or may not have had a DNR than defending not providing care to somebody who may or may not have had a DNR. And if you're dealing with hypothermic patients, as the saying goes, they're not dead until they're warm and dead. So they need to be warmed up before they are officially declared dead. So here's some of the things we sort of talked about. Expressing compassion and understanding of the pain and the anguish that a patient or a family member is feeling. But you want to be careful not to say something like, I know what you're going through. You can say, I understand this is a very sad and trying time for you, but this isn't the time for you to tell them the story of when your grandfather died and how sad you were, because it's not the same. And sometimes a little pat on the shoulder or, an arm around the shoulder of a family member is appropriate, but that's something that is sort of individually has to be judged and may be culturally inappropriate in some places. So use that with caution. And the patient who is dying may have some very strong emotions. They likely do have some very strong emotions about it, and they have a right to those emotions. So don't try and prevent them from having any emotions or tell them that their emotions are inappropriate. Their emotions are understandable. And again, we talked about this a little bit, but don't lie, even by holding information back. Tell them what's happening as you see it and understand it. Be very honest. You don't have to be blunt. You don't have to be a jerk about it, but just be very, very honest about what's happening. Your family and friends. This is now talking about your family and friends. This type of work can be very hard on them, on their sort of appreciation of having time with you. You may be at a family picnic and the pager goes off and you've got to go. You may have planned a date night with your significant other where you were going to go to dinner or do whatever, and the pager goes off and you've got to go. So a couple of things is if you can, try to schedule those things at a time when you know that you're not going to get called to work. If that's not possible, then discuss it with your family ahead of time so that they have a better understanding of what you're doing and they aren't feeling like you are ignoring them, and they don't get worried that every time they plan an event you're going to disappear. And then just talk to them ahead of time about it. Share with them why you're doing this. Listen to what their concerns are about you doing this, and see if you can address those concerns. Like I said, maybe you plan to not be on call during the family picnic or something of that. So, we've talked about physical, mental, and emotional health. We can't eliminate the stress that's going to come with the job, but we need to manage it, and we need to find a good balance between personal and your professional life. And you've got to recognize the multiple types of reactions that people may have to death and dying and understand the stages of grief that they may be going through. And that's the end. If you have any questions, please direct them to your instructor, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer them for you.